Whoa! Where'd you manage to find these? Shirley asked, staring in wide-eyed awe at the 3 giant paintings stacked in the trunk of my car. Flea market, I said proudly, dusting off my hands after touching the edge of the old copper frame. Real bargain, too. I thought they would look great on the far side of the cafe, right by the tall stools. What do you think? I turned to my manager, who had tasked me with finding some extra decorations for the new Starbucks branch she was opening. I had been scouring online marketplaces and websites for something to fill the back wall of the cafe, and had finally come across these when I had visited a local flea market over the weekend. I trust you, Shirley finally said, patting my shoulder gently. And these do match really well with the existing furniture. Well done, Tish. I beamed at her praise, glad I hadn't messed up such an important task. The new branch had its grand opening the day after tomorrow, and everything needed to be in place before then. Great. I'll start putting these up today. You don't happen to have a drill lying around, do you? I scratched the back of my neck with a sheepish smile. I forgot to bring my tools. Shirley chuckled. Ask Mary. I'm sure he'll have something you can use. With a nod, she wandered off, and I began carefully unloading the paintings from the back of the car, making sure I didn't crack the frames with my heavy-handedness. I carried them one at a time from my car into the cafe, laying them out on the table in the break room so that I could give them a once-over. The style could only be described as abstract. There were no legible figures in the paintings, just swirls of colors and patterns that matched the chic, modern aesthetic of the coffee shop. The colors were muted instead of garish, with specks of gold that complemented the gold accents of the furniture. As soon as I saw them, I knew they'd be perfect. Mary managed to source a drill for me, as well as gloves and safety goggles, so I got to work measuring and installing the hooks for the paintings to hang from. After half an hour of drilling, and measuring, and drilling again, the hooks were finally in place, and the floor was covered in plaster and dust. Shirley shot me a raised brow at the mess, but I promised her I would vacuum up every last particle, which seemed to appease her. With the hooks done, I unplugged the drill, took off my goggles, and inspected my handiwork. They seemed evenly spaced and straight, but the real test would be mounting the paintings themselves. Mary had been polishing them for the past 20 minutes, and now the copper frames gleamed blood red beneath the fluorescence. He helped me put them up, and after cleaning up the mess on the floor, I finally dusted off my hands and grinned. They look great, Shirley said from behind us. Mary was quiet, staring hard at the painting on the right, a multitudinous swirl of pinks and grays. Something wrong? I asked him. He seemed to snap out of his daze, flashing me a hurried smile. No, it's just... Is it me, or is there a face in that painting? I frowned at him, then at the artwork, trying to pinpoint where he was looking. I don't see a face, I told him. All I see is swirly things. Mary pursed his lips, pointing to a section of the painting in the corner. There, see? There's eyes, and a nose, and a chin. He followed the curve of the line with his fingers, but I was still struggling to see the face he was talking about. Maybe, I said nonchalantly. I've never been one of those people who see faces and images and things, though. Take me cloud watching, and all I see are clouds. Mary nodded. I'm probably just seeing things, he said, clearing his throat. But yeah, I think they look great. He shot the painting a final, questioning look before walking away, humming to himself. I shrugged it off. As long as the customers didn't complain, it didn't matter what we thought. At least now we didn't have to stare at a blank wall. The opening of the new Starbucks branch ended up being a success. I was exhausted by the time I was ready to clock out of my shift, having been rushed off my feet serving the steady flow of customers coming into the cafe. As I was heading to the staff room to grab my stuff, I was apprehended by a young woman. Hello, do you work here? The woman asked, holding hands with a young girl who had tears streaming down her cheeks. Yeah, is everything okay? I asked, my gaze flicking across to the girl's teary-eyed look and back to the woman. The woman's lips pursed, and she turned to point at something behind her. I'm not sure that's very appropriate to have in a family-friendly cafe like this, she said. My daughter was very upset when she saw it. I stared at her in confusion. I'm sorry, I don't understand, I said, following the direction of her outstretched hand. She was pointing towards the paintings. What do you mean, not appropriate? Having scary faces on the walls, the woman clarified. In the paintings, there are some horrible faces. Like I said, it made my daughter very upset. I gave her another bewildered look. There are no faces in those paintings, ma'am. It's just abstract art. The woman gave me a disapproving glare. I'd appreciate it if you didn't dismiss my concerns. Can I take the matter to your manager? I hurriedly shook my head. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dismiss them. I just don't see any faces, I admitted, scratching my cheek. But I'll take a look and I'll discuss the matter with my senior. I'm very sorry for the trouble it caused you and your daughter. The woman gave me another narrow look before hurrying out of the cafe, her daughter sniffling behind her. What the hell was that all about? What scary faces was she talking about? I wandered casually up to the paintings and had a closer look, but I couldn't see anything that would frighten someone to tears. With a sigh, I decided to mention it to Shirley when she was in the following morning, and got my stuff ready to leave. Several more complaints cropped up in the days following the shop's opening. All of them related in some way to the gruesome and horrible faces that people were seeing in the paintings I had bought. No matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything that resembled a human face amongst the swaths of color, and couldn't comprehend why people were getting so upset by it. I thought maybe it had been a prank at first, set up by Mary or another colleague, but people's reactions were far too genuine for it to just be made up. I ended up bringing the matter to Shirley, who asked me to find something different to put up instead. Although she couldn't see anything wrong with them either, the amount of complaints we were receiving was ruining our reputation, and it was best to just switch out the decor to avoid repercussions in the future. In the end, I managed to find some simple, block-colored paintings that still matched the cafe, and stayed behind late one afternoon to put them up. I didn't like them quite as much as the abstract ones, but hopefully it would be enough to stop people complaining. I carried the old paintings into the break room, setting them down on the table. I was the only one there, since everyone else had gone home, and most of the lights were off, casting eerie shadows around the cafe. As I was getting ready to leave and close up, something caught my attention. What looked like eyes staring back at me from the painting. My heart jerked in my chest as I stared at the picture on the table. It had changed. The pink had turned into a sickly, flesh-colored hue, and the gray had darkened, forming dark shadows along the canvas. And in the middle of it all was a face, with dark gouges for eyes, and its mouth open in an endless scream, the swirls of pink coming together in a pale, fleshy mirage. The image made me feel sick to my stomach. That face, where had it come from? Is this what everyone had been seeing? Feeling a chill creep over my spine, I grabbed the 3 paintings, trying not to look too hard at them, and tossed them into the trash bins behind the cafe. Then I closed up the shop and tried to erase the memory of the gruesome face in the painting completely from my mind. I always thought marriage was about partnership, about sharing burdens and joys equally. But as the year dragged on, my perception of it shattered like glass under a sledgehammer. It started with a series of unfortunate events. Surgery in January, followed by thousands of dollars in car repairs. College consumed my days, and I worked full time to keep us afloat. Anxiety gnawed at my insides, forcing me onto medication. Amidst all this chaos, housework became an unbearable weight. I did everything: cleaning, cooking, laundry, while my husband blissfully ignored the messes he created. 2 weeks ago, I made a decision. I would stop cleaning up after him. If he was content living in squalor, then so be it. I would clean only after myself. Trash I produced was thrown away. My dishes were washed. My laundry was done. His mess, however, was left untouched. Today was no different. My husband slept until 1 p.m., despite having to be at work at 8. Meanwhile, I had worked from 8:30 to 6:30. When I got home, the kitchen table was a disaster. The trash hadn't been taken out, despite his promise to do so. The bag of takeout he left on the floor had been torn apart by the cats. Clean clothes and towels were strewn across the ground. I was livid. I cleaned my own messes, put away my belongings, and washed only my clothes. His laundry remained on the floor, where he had carelessly tossed it. Dried up cat puke, 3 piles of it, dotted the floor. Remnants from weeks ago that he ignored as he stepped over them. Usually, I would have cleaned them, but not anymore. I decided to see how long it would take him to address the mess. I guessed it would be another week or 2, even though we had the next 2 days off. Oddly enough, my anxiety lessened. With only my own mess to manage, I had time to relax. The house was dirtier, but I didn't care. If we each cleaned up after ourselves and shared household duties, life would be simpler. He came home after a 5-hour shift and asked if I wanted to go out to eat. He didn't know that there was chicken thawing in the fridge that needed to be cooked, and he certainly didn't offer to cook it. Instead, he retreated to the game room. I waited, thinking he'd noticed the laundry or the clutter on the table. He didn't. He didn't think about mailing the rent check or making dinner, even though I'd worked 9 hours and was dealing with my second period of the month. The resentment bubbled within me, a boiling cauldron of anger and frustration. I felt trapped in a prison of neglect and indifference. My once loving husband had become a stranger, a careless, oblivious man who took everything for granted. One evening, as I lay in bed, an idea crept into my mind. It was dark and insidious, but it took root and grew. If he wouldn't notice the everyday messes, perhaps he wouldn't notice something more sinister. Over the next few days, I began to plan. I moved through the house with purpose, but my husband remained oblivious. He continued his routine of work and gaming, never questioning my newfound calm or the strange glint in my eye. I started small. I bought a set of rubber gloves and a few bottles of bleach. I disposed of the cat puke, scrubbing the floor clean, but I left the gloves and bleach conspicuously in the corner. He didn't ask about them. My opportunity came one Saturday morning. My husband was asleep, as usual, while I cleaned the kitchen. I found a sharp knife, the kind that could cut through bone with ease, and hid it under the sink. I made sure to leave no traces, no fingerprints. I felt a cold, calculating detachment as I prepared. That night, I suggested we watch a movie together, something we hadn't done in months. He agreed, surprised by my sudden affection. As the credits rolled, I offered to make us a late-night snack. He smiled, oblivious to the darkness in my heart. I returned with 2 glasses of wine. He sipped his without hesitation. Within minutes, he was unconscious. The sedative I'd slipped into his drink worked quickly. I dragged his limp body to the bathroom, my muscles burning with effort. I placed him in the bathtub, his head lolling to one side. The knife glinted under the harsh bathroom light. I felt a rush of adrenaline as I picked it up. I thought about the months of neglect, the endless chores, the piles of cat puke. My anger surged, blinding me to the horror of what I was about to do. With a steady hand, I made the first cut. Blood poured from the wound, staining the white tub. I worked methodically, my mind detached from my actions. The sound of the blade slicing through flesh and bone was sickening, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Hours passed. I was drenched in sweat and blood, my body aching from the effort. I looked down at what remained of my husband, now unrecognizable. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a twisted sense of justice. I had freed myself from his neglect, his indifference. I cleaned the bathroom meticulously, scrubbing away every trace of blood. I disposed of the knife and the rubber gloves, careful not to leave any evidence. I packed the remains into black trash bags and carried them to the basement, where I hid them behind old boxes and forgotten junk. For the next few days, I lived in a state of surreal calm. My husband's absence was hardly noticed by anyone. He had few friends, no close family. At work, they assumed he'd taken off without notice, something he'd done before. I carried on with my routine, maintaining the facade of a grieving wife. But the calm didn't last. Guilt and paranoia began to eat away at me. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my vision, heard whispers in the dead of night. The house, once a sanctuary, became a haunted prison. I felt his presence everywhere, a cold, accusing gaze that never left me. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a noise from the basement. A soft, shuffling sound, like someone moving among the boxes. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept downstairs, clutching a flashlight. The basement was dark and musty, the air thick with dust. I swept the beam of light across the room, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The black trash bags were untouched, but the noise continued. I moved closer, my hands trembling. The sound grew louder, more distinct. It was a whisper, a voice I recognized. "You can't hide from me," it said. "You'll never be free." I screamed, dropping the flashlight. The basement plunged into darkness. I stumbled back, tripping over the debris, my mind racing with fear. I knew then that I could never escape the weight of my actions. My husband's neglect had driven me to madness, and now I was trapped in a nightmare of my own making. Days turned into weeks. The whispers never stopped. The shadows never left. I became a prisoner in my own home, tormented by the ghost of my husband. My mind unraveled, the line between reality and nightmare blurring until I could no longer tell the difference. One evening, unable to bear the torment any longer, I made my way to the basement one final time. The darkness enveloped me, the air thick with the scent of decay. I found the black trash bags, untouched, and knelt beside them. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry." The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of accusations and condemnation. I clutched my head, the guilt and madness consuming me. In a final act of desperation, I reached for the knife that I had hidden under a pile of rags. With a swift, final motion, I ended my torment. The darkness embraced me, the whispers fading into silence. I felt a cold, eerie peace as I slipped away, knowing that I could never escape the weight of my actions. In the end, my husband's neglect had destroyed us both. The house, once a home, became a tomb of madness and despair. And I, a ghost trapped in the darkness, paid the ultimate price for my descent into horror. The incessant beeping of the alarm jolted me awake, the same cruel reminder of my daily drudgery. I stared at the ceiling, the fan casting shadows that danced mockingly over my head. Another day in hell, another day as a customer service agent for a bank. As I dragged myself out of bed, I felt the familiar weight of dread settle in my chest, a constant companion since I started this job. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I believed in the mantra, the customer is always right. But that was before I worked here, before I became the target of their frustrations and anger. My previous job, one that required minimal contact with people, was a distant, almost pleasant memory. I had to leave it for academic reasons, but now, with time on my hands, I found myself shackled to this modern-day slavery. The day started like any other. I sat in my cubicle, the hum of computers and murmurs of my colleagues forming a monotonous backdrop. I logged into the system, my fingers moving mechanically over the keyboard. The calls started pouring in almost immediately. "Thank you for calling First National Bank. How can I assist you today?" My voice, trained to sound cheerful, felt like a mask I wore to hide my true feelings. "Where the hell is my money?" The voice on the other end was sharp, accusatory. I pulled up the account details, scanning through the transactions. "I see here that the transaction is pending, sir. It should clear by the end of the day." "That's not good enough! I need it now!" he barked. "I'm sorry, sir, but the system processes transactions." "I don't give a damn about your system! Fix it!" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "Sir, I didn't create the system. I'm just here to assist you." "Assist? You're useless!" He hung up, leaving a ringing silence in my ears. I leaned back in my chair, my hands trembling with suppressed anger. It wasn't the first time a customer had lashed out at me, and it wouldn't be the last. But each insult, each accusation chipped away at my patience and sanity. By midday, I was exhausted. The calls were relentless, each one a new assault on my frayed nerves. I thought about the warning I received last week for quote-unquote bad attitude after telling a customer I didn't create the system. They expected us to be punching bags, absorbing all the vitriol without complaint. As the day wore on, my depression deepened. I felt trapped, suffocated by the walls of the cubicle and the endless stream of complaints. The anger simmered just beneath the surface, a dangerous beast I struggled to keep caged. That evening, after another grueling shift, I found myself at a bar. The dim lighting and soft music provided a temporary escape from my reality. I ordered a drink, the first of many, hoping to drown the memories of the day. "Rough day?" the bartender asked, placing my drink in front of me. "You have no idea," I muttered, taking a long sip. He nodded sympathetically. "Customer service, huh?" "Yeah, how'd you guess?" "Seen that look before," he said with a wry smile. "Hang in there." I downed my drink and ordered another. As the alcohol began to numb my senses, I felt a strange mix of anger and desire bubbling up. I wanted to forget, to escape the misery, if only for a few hours. My eyes scanned the room, landing on a woman on the other end of the bar. She was beautiful, in a way that seemed almost ethereal in the low light. I approached her, my steps unsteady. "Can I buy you a drink?" I asked, trying to sound confident. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was something in her gaze, something dark and knowing. "Sure," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. We talked, the conversation flowing easily despite my inebriated state. There was an intensity between us, a connection that felt electric. We left the bar together, the night air cool against my flushed skin. Back at my apartment, the passion between us was raw, almost primal. But as the night wore on, that darkness I saw in her eyes began to seep into my thoughts. She spoke of things that unsettled me, her words weaving a narrative of power and control. "You ever feel like you want to hurt them?" she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. I pulled away, staring at her in confusion. "What?" "The customers. The ones who make your life hell." A shiver ran down my spine. I don't know." She smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "It's natural to feel that way. You're only human." The rest of the night was a blur. I woke up alone, the memories of our conversation haunting me. Her words had planted a seed of doubt, a dangerous thought that began to grow. The next day at work, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every angry customer, every insult, fueled the dark thoughts swirling in my mind. I found myself fantasizing about revenge, about making them feel the pain they inflicted on me. It scared me how easily those thoughts came. Weeks passed, and the darkness grew. I started isolating myself, avoiding friends and family. The only relief came from my nightly visits to the bar, where I sought out that woman again and again. She became my confidant, my dark muse. One night, as we lay in bed, she looked at me with those piercing eyes. "You know what you have to do," she said softly. I nodded, the weight of her words settling heavily on my shoulders. I knew what she meant, what she was pushing me towards. But could I do it? Could I cross that line? The next day, a particularly irate customer pushed me to my breaking point. He was yelling, his face red with anger. "You're useless! I want to speak to your manager!" Something snapped inside me. I stood up, my chair toppling over. "I've had enough!" I shouted, slamming my headset down. The office fell silent, all eyes on me. My manager approached, her face a mix of concern and anger. "Step into my office," she said, her voice tight. I followed her, my heart pounding. She closed the door behind us, turning to face me. "What's going on? This isn't like you." I took a deep breath, the weight of the past months crashing down on me. "I can't do this anymore. The abuse, the constant pressure, it's destroying me." She sighed, her expression softening. "I know it's hard, but you can't let it get to you. We all go through it." "Do we?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Do you know what it's like to be blamed for things you have no control over, day in and day out?" She looked away, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "Maybe not, but we have to remain professional. It's our job." "I can't," I whispered. "I can't do this anymore." She nodded slowly. "Take some time off. Think about what you want. We can discuss your options when you're ready." I left her office, the weight of my shoulders feeling slightly lighter. I knew I needed to make a change, to find a way out of the darkness that had consumed me. I spent the next few weeks reflecting on my life, my choices. I cut ties with the woman from the bar, realizing the toxic influence she had over me. I reached out to friends and family, rebuilding the connections I had neglected. Slowly, the anger and depression began to lift. I found a new job, one that allowed me to work with people in a more positive way. It wasn't easy, but I learned to cope with the challenges, to find healthier ways to deal with my emotions. The experience left its mark on me. a reminder of how close I came to losing myself. But it also taught me the importance of self-care, of setting boundaries and seeking help when needed. In the end, I found peace. I learned to let go of the anger and embrace the things that brought me joy. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope for the future. I wasn't even sure why I locked the door. I mean, who locks themselves in their own room just to play a game? But I guess it wasn't about the game. It was about the time I was buying, trying to forget for a few more moments. You see, when you lose someone, like I lost my dad, you cling to distractions. And that night, my distraction was a round of Warzone. "Dinner's ready," my dad had called. I could hear his voice echoing in my head. "I'll be down after this match," I yelled back, more out of habit than anything else. It had been years since that last dinner call, but it felt as real as it had the night before the accident. He said, "Okay," but I knew better. He never waited for me to finish anything. Still, the urge to obey was there, nagging at me, pulling me out of the game and down to the kitchen where a plate of food, now cold and untouched, was likely waiting for me. But I wasn't hungry. Hell, I hadn't been hungry in days, not since the nightmares started again. So I went back to my game. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled my headphones, drowning out everything else. I was in the zone, fingers moving fast across the controller, my character taking down enemies one by one. The adrenaline was a welcome replacement for the anxiety gnawing at the edges of my mind. Then came the second call. "Your food is getting cold!" My dad's voice came again, this time sharper, more urgent. My heart sank. This wasn't real, I knew that, but the panic set in anyway. I started praying, my lips moving silently. I just needed to finish this game. Just needed a few more minutes to get my head together. "He died 8 years ago," I whispered to myself like a mantra, trying to shake off the chill that crept up my spine. But the voice had been so clear, so commanding, like he was standing right there in the room with me. I didn't know why I did it, but I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. My voice was trembling as I spoke. I think someone's in my house," I stammered. "It's my dad, but he's been dead for years. I don't know what's going on. Please send someone." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then the operator's voice, calm and professional. "We're sending a unit now. Stay on the line with me." "No!" I blurted out. "Just hurry, please!" I hung up before she could say anything else. 3 minutes later, I heard a knock on my door. Not the front door, but the one to my room. My breath caught in my throat. "Come on out, it's the police," a voice called from the other side. Something was wrong. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized I hadn't asked for a badge number. My dad had always told me to ask for a badge number. My dad? No, I muttered, backing away from the door. "No, this isn't right." I quickly locked the door again, just as the banging started. "Open up!" the voice shouted, louder now, more forceful. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my phone. The pounding on the door grew more intense, almost desperate. I heard the sirens moments later, blaring in the distance, growing louder as they approached. Relief washed over me. Real cops were on their way. I just had to hold out a little longer. Then came the footsteps, heavy and deliberate, moving down the stairs. There was a moment of quiet, followed by gunshots, loud, sharp, and unmistakable. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard screams, agonizing and primal, filling the house with a sound that would be etched into my memory forever. And then, silence. The house was eerily silent. The kind of silence that presses in on you, suffocating, making it hard to breathe. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. No voices, no footsteps, nothing. I slowly crept towards the door, pressing my ear against it, straining to hear something, anything. But there was only silence. I knew I couldn't stay locked in my room forever. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and slowly turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing the hallway bathed in an unnatural stillness. I stepped out, my footsteps soft on the carpet. The house was dark, shadows stretching long and ominous. I made my way downstairs, each step echoing in the silence. When I reached the bottom, I saw the front door wide open, a cold breeze blowing in. There were no police cars outside, no sign of the chaos I'd heard moments ago. I walked to the door, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Then I noticed something on the floor just inside the doorway, a crumpled piece of paper, stained and torn. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The writing was smudged, but I could still make out the words. "See you soon, son. Dinner's getting cold." The paper slipped from my fingers, fluttering to the floor. I backed away, the cold seeping into my bones, the reality of the situation crashing down on me. I never should have opened the door. It started as just another lazy Sunday afternoon. I was sitting on the sofa, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, half watching some old sitcom rerun. The summer heat had made the air thick and sticky, making even the simplest tasks feel like a chore. I wasn't interested in doing much, so I found myself staring up at the ceiling, where a couple of flies buzzed around the hanging light. At first, it was just a distraction. Something to occupy my mind as I avoided thinking about the stack of bills on the coffee table, or the fact that I had work the next morning. But then I noticed something strange. The flies weren't just buzzing randomly. They were moving in a pattern, a slow, deliberate circle around the light. The more I watched, the more captivated I became. The ceiling fan spun lazily overhead, barely stirring the warm air, but the flies seemed unaffected. They continued their circling dance, and I found myself unable to look away. My phone slipped from my hand, landing on the floor with a dull thud, but I didn't care. My eyes were glued to those flies, tracing their every movement. I don't know how long I laid there watching them. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes blending into hours. I felt an odd sense of calm, as if nothing outside of that circling pattern mattered. The bills, the job, the lingering loneliness, all of it faded away. There was just the light and the flies and the rhythm of their flight. And then, in a blink, I was in the kitchen. I blinked again, confused. I didn't remember getting up, didn't remember walking here. One moment I was on the sofa, and the next, I was standing in the middle of the kitchen, staring blankly at the refrigerator door. The cool tile floor sent a shiver through me, waking me up from whatever trance I had been in. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, shaking my head as if that would clear the fog from my mind. But the confusion didn't fade. Instead, it deepened as I noticed the flies again, now circling the light above the kitchen island. It was the same pattern, the same hypnotic rhythm. And before I knew it, I was staring at them again. My mind went blank. And the next thing I knew, I was outside in the garden. I was barefoot, the grass cool and damp beneath my feet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. But I didn't care about any of that. All I could focus on were the flies. Dozens of them now, maybe more. They moved in intricate patterns, swirling through the air like they were drawing something. Some shape I couldn't quite make out. I didn't know how I got there. Didn't know why I was standing barefoot in the garden with the sky turning dark above me. But I couldn't look away from the flies. I felt like I was being pulled into their dance, my mind sinking deeper into that soothing rhythm. But as I watched, something changed. The flies' pattern began to shift, their movement growing erratic. The shapes they formed became more complex, almost sinister. My heart began to race, a creeping sense of dread inching up my spine, but still I couldn't tear my eyes away. Suddenly, I was in my bedroom. The sudden shift was jarring, like waking from a nightmare only to find yourself still trapped in it. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, the sheets rumpled beneath me. My pulse pounded in my ears, and for the first time, I realized just how wrong this all was. I jumped to my feet, trying to shake off the feeling, but then I saw them again, the flies. They were in my room now, circling the lamp on my nightstand. My breath caught in my throat as I watched them. I knew I should run, knew I should get out of the house, but I couldn't move. Something clicked in my mind, and I remembered a news story I had seen a few weeks back. People in town had been going missing, vanishing without a trace. They'd been hypnotized, some said, drawn into the woods by something they couldn't resist. The police had no leads, no suspects, only a handful of witnesses who spoke of strange patterns in the air, of being unable to look away. As the realization hit me, the flies' pattern shifted again. The shape they were forming became clear, a spiral, pulling tighter and tighter. And at the center of that spiral, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A dark, shifting figure. Barely more than a shadow, but there nonetheless. I stumbled back, fear crashing over me like a wave. I knew then that if I kept staring, if I let that spiral pull me in, I would disappear just like the others. But I couldn't look away. The pull was too strong. "No," I whispered, forcing the word out. "This isn't real." The shadow figure seemed to grow darker, the spiral tighter. My vision blurred, but I kept fighting, kept telling myself it wasn't real, that it was all in my head. And then, with a final burst of strength, I broke free. I slammed my eyes shut and stumbled backward, crashing into the dresser. The sound jarred me, snapping me out of the trance. When I opened my eyes again, the flies were gone. The room was empty, silent, save for my ragged breathing. I collapsed onto the bed, my body trembling. I was safe. Whatever had happened, whatever those flies were, I had broken free. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how close I had come to losing myself. But as the memory of that night faded, replaced by the mundane worries of daily life, I realized something. The flies weren't the real danger. It was my own mind, the way it had latched onto the pattern that had almost done me in. I threw myself into work, into reconnecting with friends, anything to keep my mind occupied. And slowly, the fear faded. Life went on, and I was still here to live it. But every now and then, when the house is quiet and the light catches just right, I swear I can hear the faint buzz of flies. And I remind myself, never again.
My mom took me to Starbucks to have a private chat. She didn't tell me what it was about, but I knew that she wanted to tell me something serious. I got there first and drank my iced tea, nervous about what my mom was going to tell me. When she finally arrived, she seemed perfectly fine. She ordered a coffee for herself and then sat across from me. She smiled and asked me about my day. I told her that I was fine and everything was normal. "Good to hear," she said. "Unfortunately, I have some bad news." She went on to tell me that she was planning to divorce my father. She wanted to tell me in person before she filed the paperwork. I was absolutely floored. My parents had been married for nearly 30 years, and they always seemed so happy together. I never saw them argue. I asked her what had changed, and she said, sometimes people grow apart. There was obviously something she wasn't telling me. I'm 26, but at that moment, I felt like a little kid. I didn't want my parents to break up. I wanted to argue with her, tell her to reconsider, but I stopped myself. It wasn't my decision to make. I asked her, does Dad know? Oh, he knows. The tone of her voice proved that there was definitely something she wasn't telling me. Okay, well, I love you both, and I'm sorry this has to happen, I said. I didn't know what else to say. We stayed at Starbucks for a couple more minutes, but I really didn't have anything else to talk about. She thanked me for understanding, and then I left. I didn't do anything for the rest of the day. I was too distracted. Honestly, I was mostly worried about my dad. Unlike a lot of families, my mom was the breadwinner, while Dad was the stay-at-home spouse who took care of me and my sister. What was he gonna do after the divorce? He hadn't had a real job in decades, so he'd have to maybe work at some fast food restaurant or something. The next day, I called in sick to work. I still wasn't in the right headspace, and I needed to see both my parents face to face. Maybe then I'd hear the full story. I called Mom to say that I was coming over, but she didn't answer. A little before noon, I drove out to their house. Both their cars were still in the driveway. I knocked on the door, but no one answered, so I let myself in. That's when I saw my dad's body lying in a pool of blood on the living room floor. He had a bullet hole in the middle of his forehead. I screamed. From the other room, I heard my mom's voice. Jane, is that you? I followed her voice to the bathroom. She was sitting on the floor, trembling. Is he gone? At first, I thought she was talking about my dad, but then I realized she was talking about someone else who murdered my dad. Chills ran down my spine. The killer might still be in the house. I ran inside the bathroom and locked the door behind me. Tell me what happened. Mom breathlessly explained that Dad had gotten mixed up with some shady people. She didn't know all the details, but she told me that he owed them a lot of money. That was the reason why she wanted to divorce him. She said that she was in the bathroom when she heard the man come in to argue with my dad. Then she heard the gunshot. I love my father so much. I really couldn't believe that he'd get mixed up with all these criminals. It was just too much to process. I pulled out my phone and called 911. The dispatcher said that they would send someone right away. I begged her to hurry because I didn't know if the killer was still here. Just stay where you are and keep the doors locked, the lady on the phone told me. That was the best she could do. I hung up the phone and then sat next to Mom on the floor. I wrapped her in a big hug and told her how sorry I was. Even though she was planning to divorce Dad, I knew that she still loved him. I could feel her trembling arms. We waited for the cops to arrive. I glanced at the door, trying to hear any noises or footsteps outside. The house was completely quiet. I can't believe he's dead, she muttered. At least she didn't have to see his body. She heard the gunshots, but she didn't have that terrible image in her head. Dad lying dead on the ground. It was all I could think about. He had his problems, Mom continued, but no one deserves to get shot in the head like that. I instantly pulled away from her. What did you say? She looked at me confused. You didn't see what happened, right? So how do you know he was shot in the head? Mom's face went instantly blank. Oops, she said. I jumped to my feet. You? Slowly, she stood up as well. Damn it, Jane. You're too smart for your own good. She stepped closer, her face blank, and placed one hand on my shoulder. You're not going to tell the police, are you? I didn't answer. I could barely breathe. He was going to take everything in the divorce, she said. I couldn't let him do that. She squeezed my shoulder hard enough to hurt. Mom, I said very slowly. Where's the gun? Disposed of, she said. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I didn't believe that. If she could murder her husband of 30 years, what would stop her from killing me too? I pushed her away. Please, Jane. It'd be so much easier if you just play along. I opened the bathroom door and ran out. But Mom surged forward and grabbed me by the waist. I was surprised at how strong she was, and she shoved me to the ground. Desperate, I grabbed a lamp from the table next to me and held it up as a weapon. If she tried to attack me again, I would slam it into her. "Stay back," I screamed. That's when the front door opened and 3 policemen charged inside. Mom looked over towards them and screamed, "Help, she wants to kill me too." The policemen pointed their guns at me. "Drop the weapon," one of them ordered. "It's not me," I tried to explain. "Drop the weapon." I put the lamp back on the ground, and the cops rushed out to handcuff me. I'm in a holding cell now, waiting to tell my side of the story. I know that Mom spent a lot of time covering her tracks, but I pray there's something she forgot, something that'll prove that I'm innocent. For now, all I can do is wait. My wife Kathy left me last year, right after our daughter Madison started college. Kathy's an extremely toxic person, so I'm much happier overall. But after the divorce, I felt less connected to Madison. I love Madison more than anything, but it became extremely clear that Kathy had convinced her that I was the reason for the divorce. I knew for a fact that Kathy badmouthed me to all our friends, so she must have done the same thing to our daughter. We still talk once a week, but there was definitely a growing distance between us, and I knew it was all because of Kathy. One weekend I was watching TV at home when I got a surprise call from Kathy. It was just after 10 at night, so I assumed that it was something serious. As soon as I answered the call, I heard Madison's voice, not Kathy's. She was whimpering and sounded terrified. "Please, Dad, you have to come help me. Come here now." I asked her what happened, but the call disconnected before she answered. What was going on? Why was Madison at Kathy's house when she should be in her dorms? I was horrified. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door. I got in my car and started driving to Kathy's house. It was pouring rain, and I could barely see the road. My windshield wipers weren't working right. I knew I should have called 911 or called Kathy's house phone, but it was too late now. I had to concentrate on the road. When I was about halfway there, I slammed on my brakes. There was a huge tree blocking the road. It had fallen during the storm. I couldn't drive around it, so I turned off my engine and called Kathy's house. No one answered. Then I called her cell, the one Madison used. Still no answer. I was going to call 911 next, but someone pounded on my window. I jumped in my seat, heart racing. I saw a man in a hoodie staring at me through the glass. His face was completely in shadow. He looked like he was in trouble, but I didn't have time to help him, not when my daughter was in danger. I put the car in reverse and started to back out, so he pounded so hard on the window that I thought it was going to break. I stopped and rolled down the window just an inch. "Are you okay?" "I am," he said, pulling off his hood to see a normal-looking face. "But you seem trapped." I explained that I was on my way to check on my daughter, but the tree had fallen, blocking my way. He said he knew the area really well, and if I told him the address, he could show me how to get there on the side roads. I let out a sigh of relief. That was exactly what I needed. The man slid into the passenger's side and introduced himself as Marshall. I told him my ex-wife's address, and he started guiding me through all the dirt roads on the side of town. We took so many turns I lost count. I didn't recognize the area at all. Kathy had moved pretty far out of the city after the divorce, and I think part of the reason she chose the area was that we would never run into each other. Eventually, Marshall told me to make a turn. I pulled the car onto a road that was so muddy, I didn't even think my car would make it out without getting stuck. "How much further?" I asked Marshall. He looked left and right. Aside from an old barn, there was no building in sight. Then, he pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. "Get out of the car." Obviously, I'd never looked down the barrel of a gun before. I had no experience with any kind of violence. This was the scariest single moment of my life, but I didn't feel scared at all. All I thought about was Madison. "What did you do to my daughter?" He looked at me like I was crazy. "Your daughter? I won't let you leave the car until you tell me she's okay." I didn't care about getting carjacked. I mean, it would be great, the car was replaceable, but Madison wasn't. He pressed the gun to my forehead. "I don't have your daughter." I still didn't move. He cocked his gun, his expression unhinged. I knew he was desperate. I knew he'd kill me if I didn't cooperate. But all I cared about was Madison. "Your gun isn't even loaded," I told him. He laughed. Then he pulled the gun away from my forehead to show me that he was serious. That was the opportunity I needed. We were still in the car, so I didn't have a lot of room. But in the tiny space, I grabbed his hands and twisted the gun towards his own face and squeezed. I wasn't expecting the gunshot to be loud, but I think one of my eardrums popped. But the man was dead. He slumped forward in his seat, his face reduced to mush. I reached into his pockets to find any evidence where this man was from and what he had done to Madison. I couldn't find anything. Instead, I restarted the car and drove back to the main road. By then, the fallen tree had been removed from the street. With the dead body still in the passenger's seat, I drove straight to my ex's house. It took 5 minutes. I jumped out of the car and raced to the front door. I didn't bother knocking. I just ran inside. Instantly filled with relief, Madison was sitting on the couch watching a movie. She was completely fine. "Dad? What happened? Why are you covered in blood?" I didn't answer her question. Instead, I asked her why she was at her mom's house. "Oh," she answered casually. "My classes got canceled, so I thought I'd come over. Mom's asleep in the other room if you want to wake her up." I did not want to wake up Kathy. "Why did you call me asking for help?" Madison just laughed. "Oh, it's this ongoing trend these days. I had to give it a try. It's a TikTok challenge. All my friends with divorced parents are doing it. I was trying to parent trap you, but it doesn't matter. Why are you covered in ketchup?" Without saying anything else, I walked out of the house and drove straight to the police station, where I had a lot of explaining to do. I'm okay now. I didn't get arrested or anything, but I'm still so angry at my daughter.
America has been good to me. It's been half a decade since Ayan and I have moved here due to the fighting back in our home country of Somalia. I would not pretend that I had moved to America for the dream or the prospect of living the big life as I would learn was possible in the new country. Our move had been strictly one of desperation to escape that dreary life of mind-numbing violence which was partly fueled by well-motivated militia and killers with nothing but the intoxicating smell of blood. In many regards, America was different from Somalia. In America, I could work. It was not as easy in Somalia, regardless of the fact that I had decent education before the war had broken out. The new country offered Ayan and me some fighting chance to live as people ought to, and not as it was back in Somalia. In the small time since I had moved here, I had secured jobs that fine-tuned my skill to the level of being a manager at the local Starbucks. My job was great. And even though most of the customers I dealt with had an attitude unlike anything I had faced back home, it was by far better. It made Ayan and I happy that we could live decently and even seek out a community of fellow Somali that had migrated with us to America, some of whom we had known from back home. Abdi was one such man. Abdi knew me before I knew him. An acquaintance of ours had told him about me before he moved with his family. He was a firm believer of the faith, as I was, so it was easy for us to bond over our shared belief. America had some strange culture that we did not agree with, but with Abdi, it was obvious that he was not pleased with it, even though he did well to follow my advice of masking his displeasure. Sin is sin wherever it was committed, and it falls to the righteous to correct the way of the unjust. Abdi would say to me. Woe be on us, brother, if we fall astray of the path of the teachings. I agreed with him that we must be firm in our faith and not fall astray. By all considerations of conversations and demeanor, nothing betrayed Abdi's announcement at me until that evening when he suddenly appeared at the Starbucks raging like one drunk on a portion of pea which I had served him. His appearance set him off before he arrived where I was. Abdul, you weak-livered unbeliever! He rolled the words off his tongue as though my name were a curse on his lips, which he could not bear to hold for too long lest he offend his beliefs. You are no man! He spoke in a mixture of our native language and Arabic, the dearest languages of his thoughts and expression of emotions. It was no joking matter. I was glad I was on my feet just behind the till, because I was a man short for the night. Abdi was trembling as he spoke, his anger causing his body to quiver like a leaf on a breezy evening. He was skinny, so it was obvious how much his anger rocked him. Abdi, brother, what trouble have you brought to me in my place of work? I replied to him in our private language of conversation, so the customers would have no idea what his grouse was or my offense had been. I curse you! You are no brother of mine! I will kill you right this minute where you stand! Abdi's voice rose and rose. I will wipe the curse of your family from this earth! How have you strayed from the faith? I tried to reconcile his perch to an offense I may have been guilty of, and nothing came to me immediately. My face betrayed my concern and panic at his behavior. Abdi continued, and before I could confront my shock, the security quickly came to take him away. I shrugged and tried to continue my work, but an uneasy feeling lingered, even as I knew that Abdi had been removed from my presence. His words made its round in my ears and my senses. It terrified me greatly, and even though I tried to maintain some level of composure, it was obvious that it was shallow. And then it struck me. Please, no! I blurted in horror, flicking my wristwatch over. I had 50 minutes left until it was time to clock out, but I couldn't wait. My bowels loosened and my muscles contracted so stiffly that walking was a chore for me. I called one of the guys and told him to cover for me, as I had some place that I needed to be as a matter of urgency. Whether he gave his consent to it or not, I would not know. I rushed out of that Starbucks and ran with all of the strength I had to my house. Tears streamed down my face, kissing the wind as I ran. My heart almost exploded in my chest from fear of what Abdi would do. I knew the man. I knew what drove him. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and immediately called 911 to report that I may be needing police help as a crime was happening, as I hoped it would not have happened at my house. They asked if I was sure, and I turned my phone off, hoping to the heavens that Abdi did not get to Ayan before me. When I arrived home and shoved my door open, my worst fears materialized in front of me. I almost collapsed to the floor from the weight of dejection which I felt in that moment as I saw Ayan on her knees, with Abdi standing to her side with the sharpest knife I had ever seen in my life in his grip. You are a disgrace to the faith, Abdul. Your wife cheated and you stick with her? Abdi spat out a frothy spittle at me. The blob landed on my shoe. I will do what you cannot, and I will regain your honor. Please, Abdul, I don't want to die, Ayan begged. Do not, Abdi, brother, I beg you, I pleaded, beside myself with fear that made sweat slink down the spinal column of my back. I should kill you too when I'm done with her, Abdi promised. And without uttering another word, he proceeded to place the blade on her neck. My heart jumped into the hollow space of my mouth, and my eyes turned red from sheer dread. My knees could not support the weight of my body. It was a nightmare. It was my nightmare. I almost tumbled over where I stood. My world was crashing before my eyes. and Abdi, maddened with rage, had seen the face of God sanctioning this terror. I gave up, until the door behind me yanked open with a forceful bang. "Drop your weapon!" the cops hollered as they burst into the room. 2 shots rang out, and the room was suddenly in chaos. Ayan crawled to me, and the cops guided us outside as the terror of our lives was brought to an end.
I was jolted awake by the chime above the door of the store's main entrance. It took me a moment to get my bearings as I blinked sleep out of my eyes and glanced around the dark office. My thoughts were sluggish, but something immediately felt off. I had fallen asleep doing paperwork many times before, and I usually didn't wake until the morning. But it was still dark out. It was then that I remembered the chime that had woken me. A chill ran through me as I recalled locking the door hours earlier. I did lock the door, didn't I? Yes, I distinctly remembered doing so because a customer wanted to get inside, but I told him he had to wait until tomorrow. It's not like getting the latest comic was a life or death situation. I listened carefully, but there was no sound coming from the racks of comics outside my office. Still, I wouldn't be getting anything done until I checked the door. The dim lamp in the office provided just enough light for me to reach the door without tripping. The chime sounded again as I pulled it open. Maybe I hadn't locked it. I glanced up and down the sidewalk, but I couldn't see anything through the darkness and rolling fog. A shiver ran up my spine as I turned back to the store. "Hello? Is anybody there?" No answer. I was probably being paranoid, but I wasn't taking any chances. I reached over and pulled the light switch, wincing as I prepared for the glare of the bulbs. But nothing happened. I flipped the switch again and again, but still nothing happened. My heart rate began to speed up, even though I tried to rationalize the situation. At least the office light was still on. I took a step towards it, and that's when it flickered and died, leaving me in complete darkness. Don't panic, Eddie. Don't panic. Part of me wanted to rush out the door and never look back, but the rational part of me thought that was ridiculous. Besides, the keys were in my office. I held my breath and listened carefully, but no sound emanated from the rows of comics. I was alone and acting like a paranoid fool. I sighed in relief. That's when I heard the creak. It sounded a few feet to my right, and although I couldn't see anything there, I could suddenly sense a presence. My muscles tensed and I stood frozen to the spot. Hello? There was no response, but I could feel the presence stepping nearer until the sound of its breathing filled my ears. I was just beginning to make out the shape of the being when a light shone in my eyes and left me briefly incapacitated. I shuffled backwards and knocked over a magazine stand, the loud crash echoing in the room. I blinked rapidly, trying to regain my sight, but when my vision cleared, I almost wished it hadn't. The creature in front of me was more frightening than the scariest comic book villain I had ever seen. It held a flashlight underneath its chin, creating creepy shadows on its already terrifying face. Its glowing red eyes pierced the depths of my soul, and its rubbery skin was melting down its cheeks. It opened its mouth to reveal a set of 3-inch-long teeth sharpened into points. I was so transfixed by its face that I didn't notice the hand reaching out towards me until the creature had grabbed my throat in its talons. The slender fingers wrapped around my windpipe as its nails dug into my skin. The creature cocked its head as if it was unsure what to do with me. "Please," I choked out, forcing air through my crushed windpipe. "Let me go," I gasped. The creature's mouth opened even wider in what seemed to be a smile. Then it turned off the flashlight, leaving us in darkness once again. It took me a moment to notice that it had removed its hand from my throat. Was it letting me go? I stumbled towards the door and yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Somehow, it had been locked again, and the keys were still in my office. I turned around and squinted into the dark interior of the store. The emergency exit was on the other side. All I had to do was make it through the racks of comics to reach the back of the store and I would be free. As I took a step forward, a faint rumble echoed around me. The creature was chuckling. My heart sunk to my toes as I realized this was its plan. It wanted to play a game. I visualized the layout of the store in my mind. If I was quick enough and smart enough, I could escape this nightmare alive. For one stupid moment, I really thought I could do it. I darted forward and immediately felt a sharp claw rip at my back. My shirt had been torn open, but the skin hadn't been touched. Yet. My breathing grew heavier as I made a beeline in the opposite direction. But again, I was met with a touch of talons. I cried out in pain as the monster slashed my arms. The cuts weren't too deep, and I knew that was because it was still playing. In a desperate attempt to buy time, I threw a coin over my shoulder and prayed that the monster would pounce after it. It was a stupid plan, but it was all I had. I took a deep breath and steadied my legs, ready to make another run for it. I pictured the door just a few feet away. Freedom was so close. It was still too dark to see much, but thankfully the emergency door had a glowing exit sign above it. Hope surged through me as I grabbed the handle and gave it a mighty push. It opened just a crack before banging into something on the other side. The creature chuckled again, and I lost all hope in the moment. The monster had blocked me in. There had never been any chance of escape. The game was designed for me to lose. The glow of the exit sign provided enough light to see the creature approach, and I watched in horror as it extended its pointed claws and gashed my skin. The smile never left its face as it tore me apart with its sharp claws, blood spewing over us both. I screamed in agony and pleaded for mercy, but the monster didn't stop until nearly every inch of me had been pierced by its talons. I was beginning to float in and out of consciousness as the creature finally pulled back. I could no longer tell what was real and what was my imagination as I watched it pull back its face to reveal an ordinary man beneath. It was the customer who asked me to stay open late. He waved a comic in front of my face with a sadistic smile. "You should have let me in." I heard the bell chime once more as I faded from consciousness. I stood under the flickering neon lights of the bus station, the hum of the fluorescent tubes overhead buzzing like a nest of angry bees. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message from my friend, but the screen remained stubbornly dark. The station was nearly empty, save for a few tired souls huddled on the benches, waiting for buses that seemed as elusive as my friend. I leaned against the wall by the payphones, the cold metal of the ancient device pressing into my back. It was one of those nights that made you question your choices. Why had I agreed to meet here of all places? The air was thick with the smell of stale urine and fast food, a scent that clung to everything and everyone. I checked my phone again. Nothing. Just as I was about to give up and leave, a figure shuffled into my peripheral vision. He was a homeless man, his clothes a patchwork of worn fabric and grime. His hair hung in greasy tangles around his face, and his eyes were dark hollows. He moved towards the payphones, his steps slow and deliberate. I stiffened, hoping he would pass by without incident. But he didn't. Instead, he picked up the receiver of the phone closest to me and brought it to his ear. He didn't dial a number, he just stood there, staring at me through the dirty glass of the phone booth. His gaze was unsettling, like he could see something I couldn't. For a moment, I considered moving away, but curiosity rooted me to the spot. The man didn't speak or make any move to engage with the phone. He just stood there, the receiver pressed to his ear, his eyes locked on mine. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. The air around us seemed to thicken, and a chill ran down my spine. I tried to ignore him, but his unwavering stare made it impossible. I cleared my throat, shifting uncomfortably. You okay, man?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. He didn't respond. He didn't even blink. I glanced around, hoping someone else would notice, but the few people in the station were oblivious, lost in their own worlds. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally moved. He placed the receiver back on the hook with a slow, deliberate motion. Then he turned and walked away, his steps echoing in the empty station. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell had that been about? I was about to text my friend, telling them I was leaving, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for your patience. The call has been received." I stared at the screen, a sense of unease creeping over me. The call? What call? I hadn't made any calls. The homeless man's face flashed in my mind, his eerie silent vigil at the payphone. I typed a reply, my fingers trembling. "Who is this?" Almost immediately, the response came. "We apologize for any inconvenience. Your participation was necessary." My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the messages. Participation? In what? I looked around, half expecting the homeless man to reappear, but the station was as empty as before. I decided it was time to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been part of something beyond my understanding, something dark and unsettling. As I made my way to the exit, my phone buzzed again. "Thank you for your patience. Your friend will arrive soon." I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I turned back towards the payphones, a shiver running down my spine. There, standing where the homeless man had been, was my friend. They looked confused, glancing around as if trying to find me. I rushed over, relief flooding through me. "Hey, what happened? I've been waiting forever." My friends shook their head. "I don't know. I was on my way and then everything went blank. Next thing I know, I'm here." I didn't understand it, but as we left the bus station together, the unsettling feeling began to fade. Maybe it was a strange coincidence, or maybe something beyond my comprehension had occurred. Either way, I was just glad my friend was safe.
I never thought that a knock on the door could change everything, but that morning, it did. For 6 months, the four of us had fallen into a routine that felt like some cruel joke. Rhett, Oliver, Steve, and I, carpenters by trade, unemployed by circumstance, had spent each day in a desperate search for work. Rhett and Oliver, seasoned craftsmen, had taught me most of what I knew. Steve, on the other hand, had always been the strong, silent type. A big guy, built solid, but with a quietness that made him seem distant, like he was lost in a place none of us could reach. We'd start each day the same: breakfast at the diner down the street, coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, and stale conversation about our empty prospects. Then, we'd head back to my place, scouring the job ads over a couple beers, pretending we didn't know what the results would be. No work, no hope. That morning, though, was different. There was a heaviness in the air, a sort of quiet that wasn't natural. Rhett was pacing, his eyes darting to the window every few seconds. Oliver was unusually silent, tapping his fingers on the edge of the table. Steve just sat there, staring at the wall like he was trying to see through it. "I don't like this," Rhett muttered. He had this way of reading the room, sensing that things were off. I think that's why he was always the one taking charge, keeping us focused. "Yeah, something's up," Oliver agreed, though he didn't stop his tapping. I looked at Steve, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but he just kept staring at the wall. It was like he knew something we didn't. Then came a knock. 3 quick taps on the door, sharp and urgent. My heart skipped a beat, and I could see the tension ripple through the group. I don't know why, but something about that knock made my skin crawl. I opened the door to find a man standing there, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, like it had been borrowed. He was tall, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though it wasn't sunny out. He looked official, but in a way that didn't sit right with me, like a wolf dressed as a sheep. "Are you gentlemen looking for work?" he asked, his voice smooth, but with an edge to it. "Yeah, we are," I said, trying to keep the unease out of my voice. "I've got a job for you. It pays well, but it's not exactly conventional," he said, pulling out a card and handing it to me. "Meet me at this address tonight at 9 p.m. We will discuss the details." The man turned and left before I could ask anything more, leaving us standing there, staring at the card in my hand. It had no name, just an address scribbled in ink. "What do you think?" Rhett asked, his voice low. "I don't think we have a choice," I replied, feeling the weight of those 6 months of unemployment pressing down on me. We needed money, needed something to give us purpose again. We showed up at the address at night, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. The man was waiting for us there, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 other men stood beside him, both of them built like they could break you in half. The job was simple, at least on paper. The man needed some carpentry work done, reinforcing a room in the basement of a warehouse. He didn't say why, and we didn't ask. But as we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "Why would anyone need a room this secure?" Oliver whispered to me as we nailed thick wooden beams into place. "Don't think about it," I whispered back. But I was thinking about it, and I knew the others were too, especially Steve. He'd been acting strange since we got here, his unusual silence replaced by a kind of brooding intensity. I caught him staring at the door to the room more than once, like he was waiting for someone to come through. We finished the job and we were about to leave when the man stopped us. "One more thing," he said, that smooth edge to his voice now sharper. "You can't tell anyone about this, ever." There was something in his tone that made my blood run cold, like it wasn't a request, it was a threat. We walked out of there with our pay, but none of us felt good about it. The silence between us was heavy, and I could see the same question in Rhett and Oliver's eyes that was in mine. What had we just been a part of? The next day, Steve was gone, disappeared without a word, without a trace. We tried calling him. We went by his place, but it's like he vanished into thin air. A few days later, we saw the news. A body had been found in the river, beaten beyond recognition. They didn't say it was Steve, but I knew. We all did. I couldn't stop thinking about that room we built, the man's cold eyes, and Steve's haunted silence. Months passed and we tried to move on, but the past has a way of catching up. One night, I got another knock on the door, but this time it was Rhett. "I found something," he said, holding out a worn notebook. It was Steve's notebook. Inside were notes scribbled about the job, the man, and something else. Something about a hidden compartment in the room. We went back to the warehouse, just Rhett and me. I wasn't sure what we were looking for, but we had to know. We found the compartment, just like Steve had written. Inside, there was cash, a lot of it. But there was also a letter. It was from Steve. He knew. He knew what the room was for, what it was hiding. And he knew that the man wasn't going to just let us walk away. But Steve had a plan. He took something valuable from the man, something that would make him think twice before coming after us. The cash was his way of making sure we would be okay, that we could get out and start over. We did. We left town that night, splitting the cash between us. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to leave the darkness behind and find some light again. In the end, Steve saved us. And although guilt still lingers, I know he did what he had to. for us.
It was a typical Thursday evening. I was lounging on my worn-out couch, lazily scrolling through social media and texting friends. The apartment was quiet, the only sounds being the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the wooden floors. It was getting late, and my eyelids were growing heavy. I decided it was time to call it a night. I got up, stretched, and made my way to the bathroom. The familiar routine of brushing my teeth and washing my face always had a soothing effect. After that, I headed to my bedroom, changed into my comfy pajamas, and slipped under the covers. As I settled in, I reached out for my phone to set the alarm, only to realize it wasn't there. Panic instantly set in. I tossed the blankets aside and checked the nightstand, but my phone was nowhere to be found. Where did I leave it? I muttered to myself, trying to retrace my steps. I distinctly remembered having it in the living room, so I got out of bed and headed there. The living room looked just as I had left it. I checked the couch cushions, the coffee table, and even the floor, but my phone was missing. Growing more frustrated, I moved to the bathroom. Maybe I had absent-mindedly left it there while washing up. But after a thorough search, it became clear that the phone was not in the bathroom either. But by this point, a sense of dread was creeping in. It didn't make any sense. I searched every nook and cranny of my small apartment, turning it upside down. After an hour of fruitless searching, I was exhausted and more than a little freaked out. I decided to use my computer to call my phone, hoping the ringtone would lead me to it. I logged into my Gmail account and dialed my number. The sound of my ringtone broke the silence, but it wasn't coming from anywhere I had searched. It was faint and muffled. I followed the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. It was coming from my bedroom closet. With trembling hands, I opened the closet door. The sound was louder now, but it was still muffled. I rummaged through my clothes and shoes, following the ringtone. Then, to my utter bewilderment, I found my phone wrapped up in a plastic grocery bag buried under a pile of shoes. I stared at it in disbelief. How in the world did it get there? I hadn't touched that pile of shoes in weeks, and I certainly hadn't put my phone in a plastic bag. I unwrapped it and held it, the screen lighting up with my missed call notification. "Hello?" I answered, half expecting to hear something sinister on the other end, but there was only silence. I hung up and sat down on the floor, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Nothing about that night added up. I knew I hadn't put my phone in the closet, let alone wrapped it in a plastic bag. It felt as if someone or something had been playing a twisted game with me. The thought of an intruder crossed my mind, but there were no signs of forced entry, and nothing else was out of place. To this day, I have no explanation for how my phone ended up in that closet. It remains one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. I've moved to a new place since then, but every now and then, when I'm alone at night, I can't help but feel a shiver run down my spine, wondering if whatever was in that apartment has followed me.
It started with a text message. One random evening, as I was lazily scrolling through my phone, a notification popped up. "Hey, how are you feeling today?" the message read. It was from an unknown number. Normally, I would ignore such texts, but something made me respond. "I think you have the wrong number." The reply came almost instantly. "Oh, sorry, I was trying to reach my friend. Anyway, how are you?" I should have ended it there, but I didn't. Maybe it was boredom, maybe curiosity. "I'm good, thanks. Who's this?" She introduced herself as Emily. She was friendly, open, and our conversation flowed easily. It was as if we had known each other for years. We talked about our favorite movies, music, and even shared some personal anecdotes. One thing led to another, and we ended up chatting for hours. Over the next few days, our messages became a regular part of my routine. One night, Emily mentioned she had been a patient of my dad's. My dad was a well-known pediatrician in our town, and it wasn't uncommon for his former patients to recognize me. "Your dad was always so kind to me," she texted. "I spent a lot of time in his office when I was younger." "He's a great guy," I replied, feeling a strange sense of pride. "What did you see him for, if you don't mind me asking?" There was a long pause before the reply. "I had some issues growing up, mental health stuff." I felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry to hear that. I hope things are better now." "They are," she responded, but there was something about her tone that felt off. As weeks passed, our conversations took a darker turn. Emily started sharing more about her troubled past. She talked about the bad household she grew up in and the torment she endured. I felt an increasing sense of obligation to be there for her. I tried to provide comfort, but there was always a shadow of something sinister in her words. One evening, Emily sent a chilling message. "Do you believe in fate?" "I guess so. Why?" "Because I think it's fate that we met." "I think you're the only one who can help me." The message sent a shiver down my spine. "What do you mean?" "I need you to understand what I went through. I need you to feel my pain." Her words were unsettling. "Emily, maybe you should talk to a professional about this." "No, I need you," she insisted. "Meet me at the old park tomorrow night." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Curiosity and a twisted sense of duty drove me to the park at the designated time. The place was deserted, eerily quiet under the dim streetlights. As I stood there, I felt a growing sense of unease. Suddenly, Emily emerged from the shadows. She looked different from how I had imagined. Disheveled, eyes hollow and intense. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Emily, what's going on?" I asked, trying to mask my fear. She stepped closer, and I noticed something glinting in her hand. "You need to understand," she said, her voice now trembling. "You need to feel what I felt." Before I could react, she lunged at me, and I felt a sharp pain in my side. I stumbled back, clutching my wound, trying to process what had just happened. "Emily, stop!" I gasped, but she was relentless. As I struggled to defend myself, a horrifying realization dawned on me. This wasn't just about her pain. She wanted to inflict it on me. She wanted me to suffer as she had suffered. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the look in her eyes, cold, calculating, and utterly devoid of empathy. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My dad was there, his face etched with worry. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, his voice shaking. Emily was never found. The police said she disappeared without a trace, leaving only the haunting memory of that night. I often wonder if she's still out there looking for her next victim, waiting to share her pain with someone new. Now, every time I get a text from an unknown number, a cold chill runs down my spine.
I felt my heartbeat thrumming in my ears as I looked at the red and blue lights flashing through the lobby windows. Sweat dripped down my back, mixing with the cold shivers that racked my body. I leaned against the bathroom sink, staring at my reflection. My face was ashen, my eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. I had just finished throwing up, my body convulsing with every retch. It was like my body knew something terrible was about to happen. I took a deep breath, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. I needed to get home. I needed the safety of my apartment, the comfort of my mother. I pushed open the bathroom door, stepping into the lobby. The lights were brighter now, the sirens louder. I squinted, trying to make sense of the chaos outside. And then, a rough hand grabbed my arm, yanking me backward. "Get on the ground!" a voice shouted. I barely had time to react before I was shoved to the floor, my cheek pressing against the cold tiles. My arms were wrenched behind my back, handcuffs biting into my wrists. Panic surged through me, my stomach churning again. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. What was happening? "Please!" I gasped. I live here. I didn't do anything." The officer's grip loosened slightly, but he didn't let go. "Who are you?" he demanded. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "I'm Clara. I live here with my mom. I just got home." My voice trembled, tears stinging my eyes. He hauled me to my feet, keeping a firm hold on my arm. "Did you let anyone in?" he asked. I shook my head, my mind racing. "No, I didn't. I was in the bathroom. I felt sick." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded. "All right, we're gonna check this out. Come with me." I followed him, my legs shaky. The lobby was filled with police officers and detectives, their faces grim. I noticed the apartment door next to ours was wide open, more officers inside. The air was thick with tension and the metallic scent of blood. My stomach turned again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "What's going on?" I whispered. The officer glanced at me. A woman was attacked in her apartment. Her boyfriend. Brutal assault. He got away, but we're looking for him. My blood ran cold. I remembered the elevator, the sick feeling that had driven me to the bathroom. If I hadn't been sick, I might have been in that elevator with him. I might have been his next victim. They let me go once they verified my story, but the fear didn't leave me. I couldn't shake the image of the beaten woman. Couldn't stop wondering what might have happened if our paths had crossed. Every time I stepped into the lobby, I felt a wave of nausea, my mind replaying that night over and over again. I couldn't escape it. My mother tried to comfort me, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "You need to talk to someone, Clara," she said gently one evening. "You can't keep this bottled up inside." I nodded, but I couldn't bring myself to open up. The fear was too raw, too real. I started carrying a small knife with me, the weight of it in my pocket a small comfort. I practiced using it, imagining the attacker's face, channeling my anger into each thrust and slash. It was the only thing that made me feel safe, even if just a little. One night, as I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. My heart skipped a beat as I read the words. "You were lucky that night." I sat up, my hand shaking. Who was this? How did they know? My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding. I texted back, my fingers trembling. "Who is this?" The response was immediate. "You should be more careful. Not everyone is as lucky as you." Panic surged through me. I called the police, but they couldn't trace the number. It was a burner phone, they said. I felt trapped, like a rabbit in a snare, my fear wrapping tighter around me with each passing day. I started to notice things. A shadow lingering in the hallway, the feeling of being watched. My paranoia grew, feeding my anxiety. I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't let my guard down. Every stranger was a potential threat, every sound in the night a harbinger of danger. Then, one evening, as I was walking home, I saw him, the boyfriend. He was standing across the street, watching me. Our eyes met, and a cruel smile twisted his lips. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. He started walking towards me, and I bolted, running as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was inside my apartment, the door locked and bolted behind me. I called the police again, but they couldn't find him. I felt like I was losing my mind, the fear consuming me. I didn't sleep that night, my knife clutched tightly in my hand. I couldn't let him get to me. I wouldn't let him. Days passed without incident, but the tension never left. Every time I stepped outside, I felt his eyes on me. Every night, I dreamed of his hands around my throat, squeezing the life out of me. I was living in a nightmare, and there was no escape. One evening, as I was coming home, I saw a figure in the shadows. My heart raced, but this time, I was ready. I pulled out my knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. The figure stepped forward, and I lunged, my fear turning to rage. But as the blade connected, I realized my mistake. It wasn't him. It was one of the officers who had come to check on me. He fell to the ground, clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. I dropped the knife, my hands shaking. "Oh my God," I whispered. I'm so sorry. I thought you were him." The officer's face was pale, his eyes filled with pain. "It's okay," he gasped. "Just get help." They took me in, but I wasn't charged. It was self-defense, they said. It was one of those nights where the air felt heavy, thick with something intangible yet unsettling. The kind of night where silence hung like a weight, and every rustle of the wind sent a shiver down your spine. We had always been the adventurous type, my friends and I, but something about this night was different. It wasn't just the darkness, or the fact that we were deep in the woods, miles away from any semblance of civilization. It was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But that didn't stop us. Nothing ever did. The village we lived in was more of a ghost town than anything else. Most houses were abandoned, relics from a time long gone, almost a century old. Exploring them had become our obsession, our way of shaking off the boredom of small-town life. There was me, always the cautious one, Jason, who was brave to the point of recklessness, Megan, my best friend since kindergarten, who always had something to prove, and Sarah, the quiet observer with a knack for sensing things the rest of us couldn't. We'd been hearing rumors about a particular house hidden deep in the forest that bordered our town. The locals called it the Widow's House, claiming it had been abandoned for nearly a century, its last inhabitant a woman who vanished without a trace. They said the house was cursed, that anyone who ventured too close would never return the same. Naturally, we had to check it out. The house stood eerily still when we found it, a looming shadow in the dark, its windows like empty eyes staring into the void. The moonlight barely reached it through the thick canopy of trees, casting long, twisted shadows that made the whole place look like something out of a nightmare. "Looks like it's still standing," Jason muttered as we approached. The door was jammed shut, but we were used to that. With some effort, we climbed through a cracked window, landing in a dank, musty room. The air was thick with the stench of rot, like old meat left to spoil. Giant bugs skittered across the floor, making the hairs on my neck stand on end. I wanted to leave right then, but Megan nudged me forward. We split up to cover more ground. Jason and Sarah took the stairs to the second floor, while Megan and I stayed on the first. The house creaked and groaned under our weight, as though it resented our presence. Every step felt like an intrusion, every breath an offense to whatever had been left behind. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream tore through the night, freezing us in our tracks. It wasn't coming from the house, but from the forest, somewhere beyond the dark path that led into the depths of the trees. We rushed outside, the house forgotten in an instant. The path into the forest was a black void, impossible to see through, even with the light of our phones. "I'm going to check it out," Megan declared, her voice resolute. Her eyes gleamed with that familiar determination, the need to prove she wasn't afraid, that she was braver than the rest of us. Jason and Sarah hesitated, their faces pale. I tried to convince her to stay, to wait for daylight, or for us to go together. But Megan was stubborn, calling us cowards before disappearing into the inky darkness. Minutes felt like hours as we stood there, listening to the silence that followed. Then, another scream, this one unmistakably Megan's, pierced the night. Without thinking, we plunged into the forest, our fear forgotten as panic set in. We searched for what felt like hours, calling her name, shining our lights into every shadow, but Megan was nowhere to be found. Eventually, we had to face the truth. She was gone. The police searched the forest and the surrounding areas for weeks. They found nothing. No tracks, no sign of struggle, nothing. Megan had simply vanished, as if the forest had swallowed her whole. The town was in shock. But life went on, as it always does.
I remember that day clearly, as if it had happened just yesterday. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the Walmart parking lot. My friend Jake and I were making our way from the car, discussing which snacks we should pick up for our movie night. We were just about to step out of the parking lot and onto the sidewalk when the sound of screeching tires shattered the calm evening air. A beat-up silver sedan swerved into the loading zone in front of us, coming to a halt with a jolt. The driver, a young woman, couldn't have been older than 25. Her hair was wild, her eyes wide with a mixture of desperation and fear. I could feel Jake tense up beside me, and I instinctively took a step back. "Do you guys have $200 I could have?" she blurted out, her voice tinged with panic. I exchanged a bewildered glance with Jake. No, we don't have $200 to spare," I replied, still trying to process the suddenness of the situation. "Shit!" she yelled, slamming her hand on the steering wheel. Without another word, she sped off, tires screeching again as she disappeared around the corner of the building. For a moment, Jake and I stood there in stunned silence. What had just happened? It wasn't every day that someone stopped you in a parking lot begging for money. It was bizarre and unsettling. We shrugged it off eventually, attributing it to one of the countless weird encounters one might have in a Walmart parking lot, and continued our evening as planned. A few days later, the incident was still nagging at the back of my mind. I mentioned it to my neighbor, Miss Delaney, while helping her carry groceries to her door. Her eyes widened as I recounted the story. "You haven't heard?" she said, lowering her voice. "There's been a string of strange robberies around town. People get approached for money, and if they refuse, their cars get broken into later." I felt a chill run down my spine. Was this related? Could that young woman have been part of something bigger? I decided to look into it further. That night, Jake and I sat down with our laptops, scouring local news sites and community forums. Sure enough, there were reports of a young woman matching the description we had seen. But it wasn't just her. She was part of a duo, working with an accomplice who would target the people who refused to give them money. "I can't believe this," Jake muttered, shaking his head. "We could have been their next targets." The next morning, we decided to drive back to the Walmart. Something about returning to the scene felt important, like we might find answers there. As we parked, I noticed a security guard patrolling the lot. Jake and I approached him, sharing our story and suspicions. He sighed, nodding knowingly. "You're not the first ones to tell me this. We've been on high alert. The police are involved, but these kids are slippery. They know how to disappear quickly." Just as we were about to leave, I spotted the silver sedan, partially hidden behind a row of carts. I nudged Jake, and we cautiously approached, the security guard following behind us. The car was empty, but it looked abandoned. As we peered inside, I noticed something tucked under the passenger seat, a small black duffel bag. The security guard called the police, and they arrived within minutes. The bag was filled with stolen items, wallets, purses, even a few pieces of jewelry. It was clear that this was their stash, hidden in plain sight. As the officer secured the area, Jake and I shared a look of relief mixed with unease. We had stumbled onto something much bigger than we had anticipated. Later that evening, back at my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of lingering tension. The young woman's desperate face kept flashing in my mind. What had driven her to this life? Desperation? Coercion? The next day, the news reported that the police had arrested the woman and her accomplice, thanks to an anonymous tip. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that it was over, and a sense of sadness for those caught in such desperate circumstances. As I sat on the couch, Jake handed me a soda, and we turned on the TV. The movie was just starting, but my mind was elsewhere. That parking lot encounter had changed something in me. It made me realize how close we all are to the edge, how a single moment can shift the trajectory of our lives. Jake nudged me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I replied, managing a smile. "Just thinking. Life's crazy, isn't it?" He laughed. "You can say that again. Now pass the popcorn."
It was a humid summer evening, the kind where the sun hangs lazily in the sky, refusing to set. I was lounging on my couch, scrolling mindlessly through social media, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Jake. "Guess who I saw getting off the train today?" I paused, my mind flickering through a Rolodex of faces from our past. We had both graduated high school in 2007, and over the years, the memories of those we once knew had faded into a distant blur. But something about Jake's message felt different, almost as if it carried a strange energy with it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, and without really thinking, I typed the name Mark Hastings. Almost immediately, Jake replied, "No way! How did you know?" A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't thought about Mark in years. We were never friends, just acquaintances who shared a few classes. I hadn't talked to him, nor had Jake, since graduation. I couldn't explain why his name had come to mind so quickly, but it did, and the accuracy of my guess was unsettling. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My thoughts swirled around Mark and the odd intuition that had led me to guess his name. Sleep eluded me, and I found myself tossing and turning until the early hours of the morning. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with fragmented memories of high school and fleeting images of Mark's face. The next day, I met up with Jake at our favorite coffee shop. The place was buzzing with the usual crowd of college students and young professionals, but amidst the chatter, our conversation took on a more serious tone. "I still can't believe you guessed it was Mark," Jake said, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. "What made you think of him?" I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Honestly, I have no idea. It just came to me." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you're psychic," he joked, but there was a glint of curiosity in his eyes. Over the next few days, I decided to do some digging, partly out of curiosity and partly to put my mind at ease. I found Mark's LinkedIn profile, and what I found was surprising. Mark had moved back to our hometown recently and was working at a local tech startup. The more I learned, the more memories of high school resurfaced. Mark had always been quiet, almost invisible in the crowded hallways. Yet there was something about him that now seemed significant. One evening, I received another text from Jake. "You won't believe this. I ran into Mark again. We talked a bit, and he wants to catch up with us. What do you think?" A mix of apprehension and curiosity welled up inside me. "Sure, why not?" I replied, trying to mask my unease. The following weekend, we arranged to meet at a park. When Mark walked in, I was struck by how much he had changed. He seemed more confident, carrying an air of quiet assurance. We exchanged pleasantries, and soon the conversation flowed easily, filled with stories and laughter. As the night wore on, I couldn't help but ask, "Mark, do you ever feel like things happen for a reason? Like there's some kind of connection that we can't explain?" Mark looked at me thoughtfully. "I do, actually. Funny you should mention that. When I saw Jake on the train, I had this strange feeling, like I was meant to reconnect with you guys." Looking back, I realized that life has a way of weaving paths in mysterious ways. Sometimes it takes a seemingly random guess to uncover the threads that connect us all. And in those moments, we find that the universe has a way of bringing us exactly where we need to be.
I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the purse lying there, right in the middle of my cousin's front yard. It had been almost a week since the break-in, and we were all still on edge, jumping at every creak in the house. But seeing the purse, seemingly untouched except for the missing cash, brought back a flood of memories and questions. "Hey Megan, come here!" I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of relief and confusion. Megan came rushing out, her face pale with anxiety. When she saw her purse, she let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "How did it get here?" she whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. We both stared at it for a moment before she gingerly picked it up and looked inside. Her debit and credit cards were still there, untouched. Only the cash was missing. "This is so weird," Megan muttered, shaking her head. "Why would they return it?" I shrugged, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe they just wanted the money and didn't care about the rest, but why bring it back? Over the next few days, we tried to piece together what had happened. Megan called the police again to update them, but they didn't have much to add. There were no new leads, no suspicious activity reported in the neighborhood. It was like the thief had vanished into thin air. As we sat on Megan's porch one evening, sipping coffee and trying to make sense of it all, a thought struck me. What if it wasn't a thief? I mused aloud. Megan looked at me, puzzled. What do you mean? Think about it. If someone broke in just for the money, why would they risk coming back to return the purse? It doesn't make sense. What if it was someone we know? Megan frowned, considering the idea. But who would do that, and why? I didn't have an answer, but the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes and ears open, watching for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I noticed something strange. One of Megan's neighbors, Mr. Thompson, seemed unusually interested in the whole affair. He was always around asking questions, offering unsolicited advice, and generally being more involved than necessary. Megan, have you noticed how nosy Mr. Thompson has been lately? I asked one afternoon as we were organizing the garage. She nodded slowly. Yeah, it's weird. He's never really talked to us much before, but now he's always around. A creeping suspicion began to form in my head. Do you think he could have something to do with this? Megan looked shocked. Mr. Thompson? No way, he's just a lonely old man. Maybe, I conceded, but I wasn't convinced. That night, I decided to do a little investigating of my own. I waited until it was dark, then slipped out of the house and made my way to Mr. Thompson's place. His lights were off, and there was no sign of movement inside. I crept around to the back, my heart pounding in my chest. There, in his trash can, I found something that made my blood run cold. Crumpled at the bottom was a piece of paper with Megan's name on it. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting. apologizing for taking the money and explaining that he was desperate and needed it to pay some overdue bills. I couldn't believe it. Mr. Thompson, the quiet, unassuming neighbor, had broken into Megan's house and stolen her money. But why return the purse? I took the note back to Megan, and we confronted Mr. Thompson the next day. He broke down in tears, confessing everything. He had lost his job and was struggling to make ends meet. He knew it was wrong, but he was desperate. After taking the money, guilt had consumed him, and he returned the purse, hoping to alleviate some of his shame. We were both shocked and saddened by his confession. In the end, we decided not to press charges. Instead, we helped Mr. Thompson get in touch with some local community services that could assist him.